I'm really excited for this next panel. These are four amazing leaders in our state here that I highly, highly respect. And while we have had lots of federal national conversations, we're here in Colorado. There is a reason why I moved here to Colorado from DC in 2018. This is an amazing place to live and to work. We have an amazing, rich ecosystem of research, of innovation, of thought leaders, people who are paving the way. And we're going to hear a little bit about some of that in this panel. So we have, I'm going to try to do these in order for once. Down at our far end, let me do this. Can't believe I've been so good today on the screen. Okay. We have Massimo Ruzzene, who has led CU Boulder's entire research enterprise since 2022, overseeing a portfolio that spans engineering, physical sciences, and much, much more. He's a Slade Professor of Mechanical Engineering. He has hundreds of publications to his name. He's very well researched and published. Sitting next to Massimo, thank you for being here, is Kelly Brough. Kelly leads the Fitzsimons innovation community in Aurora, where life science companies are doing cutting-edge research. She's also the former president and CEO of the Denver Metro Chamber of Commerce. She brings decades of expertise in economic development and public policy. Just admire her dearly. Sitting next to Kelly is Waleed Abdalati. Waleed directs CIRES at CU Boulder. That's our Cooperative Institute for Research in Environmental Sciences. It's an institute that's been partnering with NOAA for over 55 years, studying everything from glaciers to global climate systems. He's a former NASA chief scientist. And I don't know if you all know this, but we have a podcast at the Institute. It's called Laws of Notion. And Waleed was one of our very first guests in season 1, where we talked about coal at sunset and the energy transition happening here in the state. And he has been so gracious and just spending time with us over the years. And he was our guinea pig almost, because you sat down for us before you knew what our podcast was going to be. I know, look at us now, 5 seasons later. And last but definitely not least is Lou Córdova, who works directly with Governor Polis, who was here earlier, on strategic planning, currently heading the Global Energy Business Park Initiative. She's a 5-time CEO, experienced navigating companies from startups to the global scale, and she served on the Federal Reserve Board. Okay, Lou, I'm going to let you take it from here. Thank you.
Is this on? Yeah. So we're going to bring it down to Colorado, because it's been sort of national and even global at times. But we're still going to talk about some of the same themes, right? And we all have to realize, come on, I mean, politics and science have been together forever. I would not necessarily call them married, but maybe friends with benefits. But it does feel like we're at a crossroads right now, right? So I want to go back to that original analogy that Kristen said of what it feels like to be at that 4-way stop, right? Because sometimes when you're at a crossroads, all of a sudden, it makes you focus on what's really important. So picture yourself at a 4-way stop. You got cars in all directions. You got pedestrians everywhere. You got bicyclists, right? Everybody's got their own agenda. They got to get to work. They got to get to childcare. They got to get somewhere. You're all sitting there waiting to see who's going to go first. And then a little boy bolts from his mother and runs out into the middle of the intersection. Everyone stops. All of a sudden, your work's not that important. Everything can wait. Everyone's going to wait till that child is safely on the side. That's what I mean about this. And that's where I think we could be at a crossroads here. So things can seem pretty bad at times. Kristen asked me to give a little bit of my background, so I'm going to start with a story, and then that's kind of my last story. Now we're going to go into this. That I do head the Global Energy Park. And for those familiar with it, it was going to bring thousands of jobs and just millions in investment into Colorado. That all ended in November of 2024. And I will tell you, when the organization formerly known as NREL had to back out of a lease, Nuveen pulled all the money. Bill Gates' breakthrough energy was going to be a big partner, totally bailed. To be fair, Bill might have other things on his mind. You know, I'm sorry, that was a Bette Midler moment. She once was quoted as, "I don't forgive, I don't forget." I'm taking names. So, but that said, let's actually get into some of what the challenges could be, because you know what? The global energy park is still going on. We have pivoted. It's not about renewables anymore, but now it's about energy security, because we found common ground. We found common ground because it doesn't matter where your energy comes from if you can't secure it and deliver it. So that's what we're going to look at here, is where is that common ground? But first, let's talk about the challenges, and then we'll talk about resiliency, and then we'll talk about, hopefully, what we take away. Okay? So, Kelly, I'm going to ask you the first question. It was supposed to be what feels different about this moment for federal science funding, but that's kind of like asking somebody in Ukraine, what feels different now? It's a lot different. But tell us about, what is going on in your perspective in terms of grant funding and the challenges? I mean, grant writing was always tough, but now it's like an extreme sport. So what's it like out there now, and what are the implications if this continues?
Yeah, I appreciate this question as we try to focus a little more on Colorado. But I have to first start by saying to Vanessa, what a great presentation. I'm highly reliable and I skew slightly left. So just so you know where I'm coming from when I answer things. Yeah, so there you go. What I really appreciated in one of the previous panel discussions was the mention of World War II. And in the 1950s, how the United States of America became the largest funder in the world of research. That has continued. The largest single funder. Yes, other sources make up much more funding, but our government has played that role. And I think that's an important part of the history when you answer the question, so what's happening today? Why are you all so distraught and upset? Because there's another piece to it. You heard the panel talk about, and I loved this word, the uncertainty of the moment we're in. That's what's causing a lot of distress. And if you've ever run a business or a nonprofit, the uncertainty is what destroys you. But I think there's another piece to it from my perspective. It's not just the uncertainty of, will we get money? Will there be there somebody to answer our call? Will the FDA be able to give us our approvals? It's also, we're feeding the beast that says science isn't valuable. Science isn't good. And that beast, I think, is causing a lot of the distress and discomfort. So yes, we're worried about the money, but I think we're also very worried about what happens when you feed a beast on these kinds of issues. So let me take it right down to bio and life science. That's where I spend my days now. In 2024, we got about $3 billion in private and NIH funding in the state of Colorado. That was really good for us. We were pretty happy with it. About $600 million of that $3 billion was NIH funding, and about 2/3 of that came onto the Anschutz Fitzsimons campus where I work. That's a lot of money. And very important. And these are super early stage companies that we're working with, very early stage. And most VC funding and private funding is going to kind of middle stage companies who are more proven because they're looking for an ROI to invest in. We're high risk companies. And so not only is the federal government important, and I completely agree with the statement, you cannot make up all of that money with private strategies, but it's also who gets those investments. It's long-term, 10 years to build 30 years to build the phone that's in our pocket today. VCs are not going to make that investment with us, right? They're looking for the last 5 before it tips into a really powerful economic opportunity. And so I think it's really important we help people understand the value of those investments. And this isn't about, me being able to be at a cocktail party and be like, well, CAR T cells can go into your body and destroy the cancer. This is about saving lives, improving the quality of life. These are real issues. And the conversation we're having today, I think, has long-term impacts on the next generation saying, this is a space I want to be in and be part of.
Mm-hmm.
I know I'm going to get more positive. Hang in with me. There's going to get better.
Now let's see if we can get more right and then get our scattergram kind of right down the center. So, well, this next one's from Massimo. And by the way, I've asked anybody to sort of jump in if you kind of want to add something don't wait, for me to say, and do you want to ask it? So, but this one will be for Massimo, and this is a good one for us, Massimo, because you and I have worked a lot together on the Glow Park. I'm the one who added commercialization after every time I saw the word research, because the state cares about jobs and it cares about investment coming into our state, and this is where we laughed at lunch because we have a friend named Johan that says, research is opera. Science doesn't need to have any business plan, right? It's beautiful in its own sake. But there's a balance here between commercialization and research that can be very transformative, and it doesn't come with a business plan. So where do you think that balance is between fundamental research that can be so deeply changing in the world and commercializing it?
Yeah, well, thank you, Lou, and it's a great pleasure to be here. It's been a great day. I'll begin also with going back to 1945 and citing a quote from the Endless Frontier report it says the basic science is a long-term process and it ceases to be basic if immediate returns are expected. And I think it's a great quote. We should all memorize it. But also gives me a little pause in this particular time, because it somewhat promote the binary notion between basic science versus applied research. I think it really is important, in particular at this time, to think of it as a continuum and not necessarily linear process, meaning that basic science can occur at different stages of innovation and development. And looking at what's happening in the federal government, I think it's really important for us to think that way. We really care about, obviously, as a university, in basic science, but we also care about tech transfer. And by the way, we're really good at it. We started last year the highest number of startups of any other university in the nation. We invest in an incubator for quantum technologies. So we invest in it, not just because we hope we can get some returns from it, but it also touches on innovation and impacts two of the two eyes that Punch mentioned, right? So it's the best way that we can contribute to our communities through commercialization and tech transfer and startup. I think where the balance is, I think we really need to look at a continuum, and maybe I will give a little different spin and definitions to it. I think in this particular time, here in Colorado and everywhere else, we really need to think about curiosity-driven research and make sure we protect it. A lot of the innovations that we know and we thrive on today that improve our quality of life came from a curiosity-driven question that perhaps didn't even know what the outcome would be. Thinking about GPS, MRI, the Bose-Einstein condensate, so that some of our research got a Nobel Prize for, right? They didn't know that it was going to lead to a new qubit, form, perhaps. And so I think in this particular time, it's really important to think about how do we promote and advocate for curiosity-driven research versus, and as a complement of mission-driven research, user-inspired research, and so on, and as a university to think about how we can do it as a continuum. So.
Yeah, I think it's also worth noting all those tech startups wouldn't have happened without those investments years or decades ago.
Yeah. And maybe just to close it up, I think the one thing that I wanted to mention, that curiosity-driven research can be in areas of so-called priority, but needs to be also cultivated in areas that are not necessarily singled out as priority. Thinking about the arts and sciences and the social sciences, in our university, we thrive in those in addition to science and technology, and they contribute their own scholarship and advancements, but they also contribute to an incredible intellectual environment that fuels innovation.
And I'm going to go off script and just push on one thing because I think it'd be valuable for the audience, and I know this. So when I came here in 2000, I worked a little bit with the tech transfer office, and the stat back then, I'll get it somewhat wrong, but it's mostly right. CU was in like the top 3 of research money coming into a university. It was in the bottom 3 of tech transfer. What made the difference? Because I have seen this difference. What advice would you give to ones who want to get that balance a little more right and get those? It's been remarkable what you do, and you just launched the new Climate Ventures, huge partnership thing.
Hire Massimo.
Now, first of all, I have
Is it a
I-
culture change? Is it
I think I
what is
deserve
it?
a lot of very little credit for it. I think I'm just writing on the success of others, but I think it's an intentional effort and really looking at it almost like with a fresh look and see what we can do and learning from others. Maybe we had some advantage of starting a little later because we knew what not to do and what to do, and I think the other piece is the state of Colorado because I think it's a great place to start anew and really make fast advances.
Lou, one of the things you made me think of, Massimo, when you were talking about mission-driven research, curiosity-driven research, I think we lose the history of a mission-driven research to get to the moon and all the great things that came out of that research that had nothing to do with the moon now,
Yeah.
right? And we take advantage of. And it'd be cool if we could get better at capturing and holding that history to remind people, how valuable it is, not just take our word for it.
Yeah, I like that. But here in Colorado, we have done a lot of things right, and it's been very intentional what you did at CU. But we're also vulnerable, and Waleed, this is more for you, right? We punch above our weight. Colorado is a state in science, especially in innovation. We're known throughout the nation, if not the world, for being a really innovative place. But this is kind of, we're sort of in an earthquake here. The ground is shifting. What could collapse? What stays strong? Infrastructure wise, where do you think we're vulnerable, and where do you think we're doing pretty good?
So I think our vulnerability comes in part from our longstanding success on the federal landscape, and as those opportunities contract, we require a new way of thinking, new approaches to things. I think I see, rather than frame it in the context of our vulnerabilities, and there are vulnerabilities, I'm not trying to downplay that, but I would encourage people to think about what have we built up to this point that allows us to pursue other kinds of opportunities. And I think we have one of the most robust research ecosystems in the nation, in part thanks to federal investments, in part thanks to state support, largely in part because of just the talent that exists in this state and in this ecosystem. And so it does require a bit of rethinking. Okay, we're awesome. What are we going to do with it? Because the old avenues that were available to us, they're still available, just not likely to the same degree. And I think we can be creative and look at what opportunities are forthcoming. I'll give you one example from my institute. For decades, we were the ones that tracked the sea ice in the Arctic, and we were saying back in the late 90s, the Arctic's going to be ice-free. That's going to matter. That was based on research that was done with satellite observations. And now there's a huge interest in the Arctic, not in the context of what we're used to, trying to understand the mechanisms and what are the implications as sea ice melts to the ocean circulation, et cetera, but rather there's an economic frontier. There's a strategic threat that exists in the Arctic. And the current administration knows that. And the current administration is presenting opportunities for that. So I think there are ways of framing, of taking what we've achieved thus far. I'm only using the Arctic because that's my area of expertise, so pardon my parochialism. But it's one example. So I think we're very vulnerable if we remain entrenched in the thinking of how it used to be and why can't it still be like that. But I think we're well positioned to take what we've accomplished thus far, to build on the ecosystem that's evolved over these years and decades, frankly, and pursue opportunities either in new areas, from new sources of funding, or from the traditional federal sources of funding, as long as we bring that value proposition forward. This is why you want us doing this. You're welcome. And take that mindset forward, and I think the opportunities can be realized.
Some of our strengths have been in, space and quantum and energy. I mean, we've just done exceptionally well in those areas, but there is kind of a gravitational pull to do certain things that, Washington wants us to do, right? It's there. And so, Massimo, I'm going to come back to you on the another balance thing. Universities, they think generations ahead. The curiosity spawns things that go for decades, if not millennia. So how do you balance that? This pull to develop these ideas, because this is what the administration wants, versus this research that really can be sustaining longer than the shorter term.
Yeah, well, this is a difficult question to address. I think this is something that I think about almost every day. I think, first of all, I want to think about in an optimistic way. As you said, if you just look at what this administration wants to do in terms of priorities, and you overlap with our strengths in the state of Colorado and the University of Colorado Boulder, we're incredibly well positioned, right? I mean, I think we touch on and lead in probably all of these areas, starting from biotech, biosciences. The Colorado is the second aerospace economy, and space superiority is one of the priorities, quantum and AI. So the opportunities are there. They may not look like what we're used to in terms of those opportunities. So we need to think about, as Waleed said, how do we really capture those opportunities? Then the question is, what else is there, right? So, and how do we contribute to the other things that we do? And I think, to me, it is important as a university and as a member of the ecosystem is to think about our core mission and really think about what are our core values. And I always go back to, what does a university do as a mission? And the mission is to create knowledge and to disseminate knowledge. And by doing so, we train the next generation of leaders and thought leaders and professionals and scholars and so on. And so we have to think about, how do we do that? And how do we maintain that intellectual diversity on our campuses? So I think by advancing what we can do and capturing the opportunities and equipping ourselves we can, in areas that are perhaps identified as priority, we can benefit the other areas as well that may not be singled out as things that we want to do in the short term. And last thing I will say, the balance with me has always been in this kind of moment of transition, if you will, volatility and uncertainty, is thinking about, how do we deal with day to day, but then how do we think how do we take the long view? What's going to be, where we want to be, how do the system, and this was brought up in an independent, what we would like the system to be, a system where we can thrive. And I think maybe I talk to Waleed very often, how do we think about this with a long view perspective? So I don't know that the balance that I don't know that I answered the question, but I just reflecting on what I think about a lot.
You made me think of your last two answers were, because one of the interesting things that you said, Waleed, was that our vulnerability is just being very too comfortable with what we're already good at, which are these things. I mentioned earlier, sort of half joking about, the organization formerly known as NREL. I love their new name, the National Laboratory of the Rockies. And the reason I like their new name is because they do so much more than renewables. It gives us a chance to look at grid security and distribution and other kinds of things that they are doing, because you do get trapped into I'm famous for X, right? And this time allows us to sort of shine in other areas and explore other areas where we do have some common ground.
Yeah, and I think it's healthy to be uncomfortable. It's not healthy to be this uncomfortable, but it's
not
healthy.
productive
It's healthy to
necessarily.
be stressed to some degree, to force you to look at the shifted landscape and say, all right, well, I was very well planted in the previous landscape. I've got, good footing. How am I going to use that in the shifting landscape? And I think your example of, I still call it NREL, I will for years. But I think that's a very good example. It forces you to stop and say, okay, it's kind of a new world. What does what I brought to the table previously bring to the table now, and how am I going to use that? And a very quick example, in my years at NASA, there were people who just spent their careers using one satellite, looking at one thing, and eventually satellites stopped working. And there's kind of a, oh my God, what am I going to do now? Do I retire? How am I going to get through this? But you've learned things working with that data in that field that all of a sudden people realize, wait a minute, this is applicable to this, or I can take what I've learned, how I've grown, and use that in other ways. And I think we're talking about, as a state, as an institution, as a community, we're maybe our satellite is on its last few orbits, and we got to think about what we're going to do, how we're going to take that knowledge for the next satellite.
Well, Elon's sending 1 million of them up there, so you'll be fine for.
I met him at his first launch. I'll leave it at that.
For the reception.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's for the reception.
now you want to go to the
Yeah.
reception for sure. Now, Kelly, I want you to bring this up to the workforce now, right? Because we've been talking about the science and all that. But I mean, I had some data when we were working on a grant around energy. The labor force we will need in the future, we just don't have it. So how are we preparing for that?
I actually started thinking about that, Lou, as you were answering the question of what keeps you up in long-term kind of thinking. Name changes of a beloved lab in our state is a distraction. We could still do the critical work and the important work and keep going. And I would argue this is a moment that will cause us, I hope, to really look at what are our most vulnerable and greatest risks. We are the second most educated state in the nation today. I think the projection is 74% of our jobs now require some post-secondary education, some level after high school, 74%. We require the most educated workforce in the nation. The good news of that is those are good paying jobs. The bad news is we're doing a really shitty job of getting everybody there. And how we have managed is we've attracted everybody with their degrees to Colorado. And we're going to do a less good job of that because now our housing's so expensive and, it's a tougher place for people to make their first choice. And so this is the moment we have to say, so what are we going to do about educating our own kids and preparing them for these opportunities? And on our campus at Anschutz, we've taken some really concrete steps in the last year. We have a high school opening across the street that has 5 dedicated career paths that go into healthcare. We have guaranteed every one of those kids will have an internship on our campus. We have a School of Science and Technology on the campus, and we're working with them to say, how do every one of these kids? And the reason is, I don't know if you all know this, but most communities drive by our campuses and are like, that's a place I don't belong. Those are a bunch of fancy doctors and PhDs and elites, and those are not my people. And I think we have to really intentionally build to say, You are supposed to be on this campus. We're going to find ways to bring you here. And now I'll give you another example that is probably my most favorite. We're developers. Yeah, who knew I'd be a developer? By the way, to everyone who's a developer, it's so easy. Serious. And so part of the development, and by the way, I think Kenneth Ho is here. He's the chief operating officer out at Fitzsimons. Talk about a rock star developer on the team. It's wonderful to have him as a colleague. But one of the things we have to do is public art, or get to do is public art. And what we said is, what if we go to our local K-8 school, Burrell School of the Arts, and we say to them, we'd like your kids to do our public art. And we start bringing kids onto our campus. Again, it may not be kids who are going into science and technology, but it's kids that start to see themselves next to scientists, part of the same community. I think we have to start thinking long-term about how are we going to break down this early childhood, K-12, higher ed, into one system where our kids easily navigate through it and find their paths, whether it's to science or art or... And I think we suck at it in the nation. And I think Colorado's the perfect place to show people that we can transform that and change how we're educating our kids.
How? Give us something concrete. And also, this question is meant to be Colorado, and the governor will hate that I say this, but labor's mobile. We're teaching kids who are going to go all over the world, and I really do believe that we have to elevate all workers everywhere for everyone's benefit. And so does it really, if we can do best practices here, give us some concrete ideas. How do you feel about let's send that out into the world?
Maybe Lou, I can talk a little bit about what we've been doing in quantum, because that as a model perhaps is, or we're thinking of doing, because we did a workforce study on the needs for quantum technology in the state. And I think we, as a university, maybe think less less in an inward way, but thinking about what the actual needs of the technology sectors are in terms of workforce, right? We could easily say, give us more money so we can double our PhDs, right? And maybe I shouldn't say this, but I don't think that's the answer. And I think we found out that that's not the answer, right? I mean, we could produce more, but I think the need of the workforce, so the tech sector, is the education of a whole spectrum of skills. And so we're working with Front Range Community College to develop capabilities or utilize some other offerings that can help a workforce that can be employed in quantum. We're looking at continuing ed, maybe looking at high schools. So we have to think about as an ecosystem, and we're part of the educational ecosystem, but we're not the only ones who can contribute to it. So
Yeah, I think a critical element of this is the grade schools. And, and I think back to the things that motivated me and nudged me in certain directions. It was the teachers. And we all know that. We all have stories of teachers that inspired us or teachers that helped us get to where we are today by a few kind words at the time or just the care they showed us. I think it's easy to talk about PhDs or, people with bachelor's degrees. It starts much further upstream, and that's something we can do in the state. One thing I love about the museum is that it brings the magic, and very quickly, I'll tell you 2 teacher stories of mine. One, when I was in 8th grade, I think it was, second grade, Miss Wiki, I think it was Apollo 17, that big deal about people going to the moon. And I said to her, I said, I don't get it. She said, what don't you get, Waleed? I said, well, the rocket's moving really fast and the moon is moving. That means you got to launch the rocket to someplace the moon isn't so that you get there at the same time. How do you do that? And she said, oh, it's math. They just use math. And I remember thinking, math? That's what I'm going to do, math. And the other is when I was in 12th grade, I had a calculus teacher. I don't remember how it came up. It was in the middle of class. I asked the question. I said something about NASA. He said, Waleed, I would love to see you work at NASA sometime. And that stuck with me because I thought, getting emotional. This guy thinks I could work at NASA. So when I did, and when I became chief scientist, I did an interview with my local newspaper where I grew up. And I thanked him in that interview. And I got, in my high school reunion, the next year later, I got a lot of, that was such a cool shout out to Mr. Whitehouse in the Observer Dispatch, back when there were local newspapers. Though, teachers, grade school, think farther upstream.
But he's got one more story. And no, this is about how the arts plays a role. I want you to tell your story of your choice.
I don't want to
These one of these
monopolize the
moments.
time.
That's
I'll
okay.
try and do it quickly. When I was in high school, we grew up with very little money. My dad died when I was a kid, and we had no money. And so I was going to do something that made money. And I was good at math and science, but I loved theater. And I was deciding, I had the benefit of a free tuition at Syracuse University because my father had taught there. And they have a good engineering program. They have a good visual and performing arts program. So I thought, what am I going to do? And I thought, nobody thinks about the starving engineer working 3 jobs trying to make ends meet. So I'll do engineering. Became an engineer, worked as an engineer, went to grad school. But some of my most valuable training came in high school in the theater club in drama. I use that in presentations. I use that in talking to kids. I use that, about being present, being big, telling stories, those kinds of things. You don't learn those in school. And I think it's back to the, we're digressing here, but back to the broader educational domain. So many things matter. And theater is the kind of thing that a lot of people who are transactional in nature and want to see, show me the money, bring me the money, would be dismissive of. But it's a fundamental element, not just for the value of the art, the opera that sings for itself, but all of these pieces fit together. So it's not too different from return on investment for the applied research versus the value of the more what may seem esoteric research. It takes a broad portfolio of elements to lead to successful outcomes.
So that does segue into a vision you've just dispelled, because science, shapes every aspect of our lives, right? But to some people, science is still a bunch of nerds in lab coats with petri dishes, right? And computers doing things that they can't understand. And I defy anyone to explain quantum to your grandma. So how do we communicate the value of science? You have a theater background. That's one thing that you've been able to communicate the value of science. But Massimo and Kelly, how do you think we should communicate the value of science, because we're losing a little bit of that?
I think it's a practice that we have to develop and teach. It's not something that we can wing and improvise. So I'm a semi-retiring scientist, as you said, and I grew up in a scientific generation where I need to speak about my science with people that did the same science that I did. So I didn't need to explain the importance of what I did, because they all did the same thing. So I was never trained to talk about science and the importance of it to a broader audience. And I had to learn it. I was at the National Science Foundation, and I was sort of giving out awards for people. And one time I gave an award to somebody who was studying how hard it is to ride a bicycle if you put the pedals in the back wheel. It turns out it's very difficult. And it's a very difficult dynamic problem to study. And so I funded that project, and I got called in by my boss and said, what the heck are you funding? This thing is crazy stuff. And it turns out it took me a half an hour, but I had to explain that math was very important for robotics automation. It's the inverted pendulum and how you control an inverted pendulum, and how do you control a robotic arm, and so on. But that took effort, right? I couldn't talk to me about the stability of the system and the poles and stuff like that. I had to explain it to him. So I think I learned a little bit. I'm still not great at it, perhaps, but we don't necessarily teach it to our students to do it, right? And we don't teach to our young faculty to do it. We teach our students and our young faculty to explain the key innovations of their work, and that inevitably goes into very technical terms. And we never require them to say, why is it important, for the global benefit of society. So I think we need to do this, and we need to do this early on. We need to teach our faculty to do it so that they teach their students to do it, and that gets multiplied and gets learned early on, not just when you're getting old and you're having a hard time learning new things. So I think.
It's interesting. Today, I think we talk about science based on what's happening right now, what's cutting edge, and we forget almost every single thing in our life. That's working great. At lunch, we said, did you have hot water in your shower this morning? Oh, yeah. Well, somebody had to figure out how to make that happen for you. Combustion engines, electric cars. Like, we have forgotten that science is in every aspect of our lives. And I once heard someone talk about leadership and what it looks like and define it. And one of the things he said in his research was, if you're too far ahead, if you're too far down that road and I can't see you, I just can't follow you. And I actually think this is part of the problem with science. Today we're like, hey man, you seen what's happening in quantum? And we're all like, I can barely spell it, instead of reminding people science is embedded. The antibiotics you took were because we figured out that we could kill the bacteria instead of it kill you. I think there's ways we have to start to remind all of us how embedded science is in our daily lives, and not just the cutting edge. And I think that can reinforce. And I think, Lou, what it fundamentally does is makes me part of it. Not something you're doing to me, but it's something that together we see the value and the benefit of. And I just think we've lost that piece. We never talk about still all the ways science is in our daily life.
Do we need to embed it though, right? I mean, our kids also don't learn how to write a resume, right? No, you never learn in school, even just basic childcare techniques. We all just, watch YouTube and wing it. And I was telling them at lunch that when my daughter went to college, I said, okay, you're going to get a core curriculum in the arts, but now, since I'm paying for college, I have a mom's core curriculum, and you have 2 courses that you must take. And one of them is in comparative religions, to understand how the world works, and the other's in accounting. So do we need to actually have a course,
Maybe we could team teach that or something.
yeah. I mean, an actual course that's part of engineering, part of, here is how you communicate the value of science and actually embed that into the curriculum. It's very uncomfortable, maybe, but it's very necessary.
Think about when you were in grade school and to your point about teachers, your teacher had you do something and then they're like, Kelly, that was calculus. And you're like, what? I'm so smart. That's how science is though, right? If you tell me as a kid, hey, what you just did, so here's a great example on the Anschutz campus. I'll avoid all the fancy words, but in essence, we're continuing to discover some components in DNA, and they can bring in high school kids to actually do the research and discover these new. And so they started bringing in high school kids to do the actual research. They could name the thing they found. And it's real. It's real work that's being done. I think there's tons of opportunities like that. I think we have to be very intentional and really start to say we're committed to that kind of work from grade school through high school. And then they go on, because there's not the barriers
Yeah.
to that next stage.
The NSF would call it a spark moment, right? When are these spark moments? You guys each just said one of them. And I got a shout out to the museum because, George, even though you may be retiring soon, I'm going to remind you of a promise that you made so that everyone here is a witness to it. That in the Global Energy Park, we got $4 million from HUD to create walkways, educational walkways about renewable energy. So picture a K-5 group coming down these pathways and seeing a statue, a windmill of arms creating energy, and they could plug their cell phones in and charge it up. Well, the museum has volunteered to have the QR codes on the plaque so that these kids can say, that is so cool. What's a career in that I could do? And it would come back to, you remember that, Congress? And it would come back where they could say, oh, that's renewable energy. That's wind energy. That's super cool. I want to do, that could be a spark moment for someone. So more of that. I want to turn to some of the questions because one of them is teed up here and is really important. It's about the collaboration because, the Human Genome Project, GPS, the Brain Project that got mentioned earlier, these were all massive collaborations that have transformed our world. And Colorado's known for collaboration. Mostly the foundation of that people might not know is we're a Tabor state. We can't save a bunch of money and invest in something. So we have to collaborate to make things happen here. But when you have disruption and scarcity, collaboration can get tough, right?
Perfect moment.
It's a perfect moment, but I will tell you, I have 11 siblings and we did not collaborate over the last piece of chicken.
Yeah.
Right? So it gets tough. So how do we do this? How do we collaborate now in different ways? Because this is a different world.
Lou, when you look at our history in the 1980s, for those, most of you were not born yet, but for those of us who were, in the 1980s, Colorado had the oil bust and a terrible recession. I moved here in 1986, like the worst city you could have moved to in the United States in terms of economic activity. But, I take credit for the turnaround. But at that moment is when the business community came together and said, you know what? We got to work together across 9 industry sectors, and we're going to collaborate and grow the economy and diversify this economy with real intention. And it worked. And I would say it was actually the crisis that caused them to say, we got to do it differently. And I would argue this is a moment where I love this question of, so should we all be, advocating for federal funding? I think this is the moment we come together and say, what are all the things we should be doing and how do we do them together? And I think in Colorado, we are really good at knowing when to compete and when to collaborate. And this is the moment we collaborate and come together and we figure out how to get this stuff done.
Now, do you know the story of the chamber? How that got
Go
going?
ahead, the story of the Chamber
With the
of Commerce.
railroad and the...
Yeah.
That's the story of collaboration.
150 years ago, right? The Transcontinental Railroad was coming across the United States. They went through Wyoming because it's easier to cross the mountains. Denver businesses said, oh shit, because that was the connection to our future, right? That is what's linking the world then, or us to the rest of the country. So a group of businessmen then came together and raised enough money to build a rail spur that linked Denver to the Transcontinental Railroad. And to Cheyenne's great dismay, it worked. And Denver really became Denver, and the Denver Metro Chamber of Commerce was established based on that coming together.
Yeah, pretty cool.
Pretty cool.
Yeah, I think an important piece of collaboration is with the private sector. And I think the initial shell shock reaction when these things happen is we got to go to industry and get more money from them, right, in terms of our university. And I think that's absolutely not the right approach to think about it. Just given some reference for us at University of Colorado Boulder, we get about 5% of our funding comes from directly and solely from industry. We could do a lot better. just to let you know. And we know that. We could do a little bit better, I think, by improving IP clauses, working on better contracting vehicles, be more open to short turnaround projects and short delivery and so on, which uh, we're not really geared towards because we're thinking still in the federal landscape, of grants and we work with students. So we got to train a student, get them up to speed and so on. So we have to think about how to do it better. But I think we can do just a little bit better if we did that. I mean, at the end of the day, it's a value proposition question, right? What is the value of the collaboration that, because the private sector is driven by value and returns. And so that is the question that we have to address together as a collaboration, right? We can do better with industry because we can get more funding from them. We can better place our students and so on. And industry can do better with us by tapping into our talent, into our innovation and so on. So I think we could do better, but we need to increase the value proposition of that relationship. Because if the value were there already, we would do it already. So we need to think about how we expand that value proposition.
Yeah, and I would just say it's easy to think of this in terms of funding. Get resources so we can support the people we need to support and do the work we need to do. But when it comes to collaboration and when times are tight and you going after that last piece of chicken, I think it's more productive to not think of it in terms of funding and resources, but in terms of opportunities that can be created. And together, through partnerships, we can create and pursue more opportunities than any of us can do alone. And I think a lot of people either recognize that or on the cusp of recognizing that and just need that little nudge. And I think back to your original question, these challenging times that force creative thinking, I think can nudge us or powerfully propel us in that direction.
Yeah. And there are opportunities, right? I mean, the Black Death ended serfdom and changed the workforce, right? COVID gave us a huge amount of mobility in our lives. So there's and fighting for the last piece of chicken did hone my negotiation skills that have served me well in life, right? But I want to do a shout out. Where's Dan? Can I talk about your program? I think it's a really good example of what Massimo said, and it's you do have to increase the value proposition. Industry is not philanthropic. Yeah, here's 10K to this nonprofit and 10K for community service, but they have shareholders. They have owners that they have to do. So you really do have to do that. So one of the things that Collabs did was it took. We lost a lot of scientists lately, right? We didn't just lose the scientists. We lost their knowledge. We lost what they were what they were researching. We lost their equipment, which is $500,000 spectrometer, right? I mean, there was just all these losses, and what they did was they tracked them. Where'd these scientists go? Where'd their knowledge go? How can we find out even where the equipment goes? How can we package this together? And now when industry, and I want you to talk a little bit about your data thing as we close, when industry is relying on CIRES and others to provide them with data, and all of a sudden that data is gone, the website's down, they don't have the data anymore, they can go to Collabs and say, I need this data, I need this science. And they have an industry partnership that they could do that retrieves those scientists and retrieves that data and tracks it so that we don't lose it forever. And I think we've only got about 5 minutes here. And I do want to go over to this first question because it's like, what do you think are the strategies? And let's tie that in with the state too. What can the state do? We know that we have to rethink the feds. We talked about what to do with the feds. How do you think the state can help? Creating this ecosystem, strategies for doing this and making us stronger during this time, because we're sort of the target on the federal side.
Well, we talked at lunch. The state, first of all, can be a great convener, right? Bringing partners together, bringing corporations together, working with federal labs, with universities, attracting capital into the state of Colorado, help provide a pipeline and funding for our startups. I think the state can be tremendously helpful in that space, without necessarily pumping money into it. But I think he has an incredible power in that domain. So I think the state can help us have a holistic view of the ecosystem where these entities are not separated, universities, industry, federal labs, but they're part of a three-legged stool that works together. So I think that is a key role that the state can play.
I think one is the state can convene to ask the question, what do you need to invest in research with us, to partner with us more, to partner with this institution? What would help you? How could we incent you to hire the kids who are graduating from our schools and to keep them in the state? How could we incent you to help our kids be more successful in our K-12? Like, I think asking, my guess is tax credits go a long way. The state of Colorado is not in a financial position to, probably do much other than trying to help us think through what we could do. I think the power in Colorado is we're very small business. Now, the downside of that is you got to do a lot of organizing and a lot of bringing together to have a real impact. But these are also businesses who are really embedded here. They're probably not going to move headquarters or, this is really their state and they choose it. And so I think it's easier to help them think about what their role could be. I would also say, don't forget there's a third sector, public-private, but that nonprofit sector plays a key role in all of this, particularly workforce. And I think bringing all three sectors together to say, we each have a superpower, let's bring them on and together. And when we do, we're going to get a lot more done and develop real strategies around workforce. But for me, I would focus on workforce as the highest priority in to advance science in our state.
I just want to say the state just announced a couple days ago that it's giving millions to nonprofits and workforce to help them build their programs. So that's a combination of that partnership that you're talking about.
I guess referring back to something I said earlier, the state can certainly help by investing in the grade school education, by developing informed, well-educated students, whether they go to college or grad school or not, or whether they learn a trade or go to culinary school or whatever it is. There's value to that investment in our students in this state. The other, more in terms of advancing the ecosystem, I think the state can be a powerful megaphone. Can stand up and say, look at all the awesomeness that's going on in Colorado, in ways that maybe the individual entities can't. They can package it from a state perspective or a regional perspective, and there's a positive feedback that happens there. Once people see, wow, there's something really going on in Colorado, more people want a piece of that action. And attention starts to turn. Now we're lucky; we're in a healthy state, so to speak, now in terms of being the envy of many other parts of the country in terms of that ecosystem. But I think it's self-compounding, and if the state of Colorado stands up and says, look at the awesomeness that's here. Just like people want to come here to ski, they'll want to come here to do research or be part of this incredible ecosystem.
And it is going to snow again.
And it will. Well, thank you. I have my marching orders to go back to state with. Thank you for that. And I think we're running a little over, which just shows you that I asked AI to be the moderator, and it would have ended on time had it just agreed. But thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.